International Press Review. Well, Florence Villeminot is with me here in the studio. Hi there, Florence, for our look through the world's newspapers and our press review. Very interesting story. We've touched on it in our news bulletins. Let's see how the press is reacting to this detention of the partner of a Guardian journalist who's been involved in the Edward Snowden disclosures about US intelligence.
That's right. Well, as you can imagine, it's getting a lot of attention in The Guardian, and we'll start by looking at the front page of The Guardian, which explains just what happened. So this man's name is David Miranda, and he was held for 9 hours at Heathrow on Sunday. Now, he was on his way from Berlin to Rio, where he lives with his partner, Glenn Greenwald, who's the journalist who helped Snowden leak this information. Now, officials used the Terrorism Act to detain him, but he says that all this was intimidation. And what we see here on the front page of The Guardian is another revelation, which is that the U.S. had confirmed that it was given a heads up before he was actually detained. So this is putting a lot of pressure on Downing Street to explain just why he was detained.
Why they're using an anti-terror law to detain a family member of a journalist.
Absolutely. That's what everyone wants to know. And actually, this man, David Miranda, he actually gives an interview to The Guardian where he explains exactly what happened, why he feels like there was a total abuse of power. For instance, they seized his laptops, they forced him to give them his passwords. Just to quote him, for instance, he says, "They threatened me, saying I'd be put in jail if I didn't cooperate." Now, he says that what happened here was that the UK had pandered to the US to try and intimidate him. And if we look at another reaction, this time in the Independent, it's a cartoon where you see just this idea, where you see here, it says the National Security Agency United Kingdom franchise, and you see there the eagle with Obama and a little puppet, which is a British cop banging around that terror act there.
Okay, now according to the editor of The Guardian, who's also been writing in the paper, Miranda's detention is a proof that there is a real threat at the moment to journalism.
That's right. It's a really interesting article. His name is Alan Rusbridger, and he says, well, just to quote, he says, "A transit lounge in Heathrow is a dangerous place to be, especially if you're a journalist." And he really defends The Guardian's coverage of the Snowden story and says that the key question in this whole thing is whether something is of public interest. And he says that, however troublesome all this information is, well, these documents did really spark a debate, a public debate that needed to be had. The debate being, well, what's the right balance between national security and privacy? And he also says that, he received threats, this time from the British government, to, get rid of these documents. Just to quote him, he says he received a call telling him, "You've had your fun, now we want the stuff back." But he makes this pledge. He says, "We will continue to do patient, painstaking reporting on these Snowden documents." And the fact that Miranda's laptop was seized, well, this is not going to make any difference whatsoever.
And meanwhile, the piece of legislation in Britain that was used to detain David Miranda, well, that's coming under a lot of scrutiny too, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's called Schedule 7 of the Terrorism Act 2000. So it gives this sweeping power to detain someone for up to 9 hours without specific suspicion. And this is the editorial in The Guardian today that says, well, this was just a potential source of injustice waiting to happen. So in theory, it's for terrorism, but this article says that what really happened was just, harassment, really, of independent journalism. It's also getting a lot of criticism in other papers as well, like Slate takes a closer look at this and says that it was indeed used abusively because there's no way that Miranda was carrying out terrorist activity. And it points out that, well, unfortunately, he's just one of tens of thousands to be detained by this law, and especially British Muslims say that they often feel profiled by this law.
Okay, we are going to move on now to another story. The 2014 Winter Olympic Games in Sochi in Russia. They've been getting a lot of press recently. The International Herald Tribune now has a look at an unlikely feature at one of the Olympic venues.
That's right. This feature in particular is located right at the center of the Olympic Park. It's between the figure skating arena and the outdoor stadium where there'll be the ceremonies, the opening and closing ceremonies. So what is this? Well, it's a cemetery, actually.
Okay, handy there.
It's a very unusual story. It's a cemetery belonging to the Old Believers, which is a purist sect of the Russian Orthodox Church. And basically, the authorities couldn't move it because of the law.
So they just built the park around it?
So they built the park around it, exactly. And it's a very stark contrast from the flashy park, because the whole park was built from scratch. But a lot of people say that it's a stark reminder of all the people who had to, were kicked out of the area so the park could be built.
Okay, interesting article there. Thanks very much indeed. That's Florence Villeminot there with our International Press Review. Well, stay tuned to us here on France 24. Our coverage continues. The latest international news coming up in just a few minutes' time.